What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Becoming a Better Man podcast. I am your host, Jason Wright, and it's good to be back. I wanted to lead off with that. It's good to be back. If you're wondering, or if you don't keep up with me on social media, I've dropped some hints and then some outright declarations of what's going on. I got married. I was on my honeymoon, and I was just enjoying some really solid quality time with my wife. So I thank you for understanding the absence. I thought it was well deserved, but in case you guys were wondering, that's where I was. So I wanted to get back into things this week, right? As I got back, I had a laundry list of things I needed to get caught up with. And the first thing that was on my list in terms of work-related things, one, yes, tend to all my clients, right? That was priority one. But then further down the list, obviously, is my podcast category. And I wanted to start outlining some topics for some episodes. And I thought, based on a lot of things that I had encountered over the last month or so with either myself or with guys that I know that I'm close to, I wanted to formulate some concepts that we could discuss. So one of them being the fact that the topic of this episode, right, is why men wait to fix things in their lives until they're broken, right? Why do we do that? I know there's a lot of wisdom to be said for if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I wanted to kind of give us a little bit more perspective when it comes to this issue that we have, because while there's a lot of wisdom in waiting till it's broken to try to fix it, right? To try and switch up our methods to do things differently, right? Don't mess with a good thing. That doesn't apply when it comes to living, breathing, dynamic systems, that being our health, that being our relationships, right? Those are things that are constantly seeking to atrophy and die if we are not intentionally and fruitfully acting to enable continued life. Does that make sense? So I'll give an example. Right. So, and maybe you can think of this too, right? Where there's a time in your life where you ignored a growing problem, perhaps a deteriorating relationship or ignoring your own health, until it became a major issue. So I know in episodes past, I've given an example about, the car check engine light or the microwave starting to flare up, where, if you take the actionable steps early on, when you first start to get the hints of something going awry, if you do something then, it is much less expensive in terms of stress, anger, time wasted, money wasted on resolving the problem. Is it not? I know it has been for me. So, I'll give an example. So there was a period, it was around, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, perhaps, maybe 6 to 7 years ago, actually, probably closer to six. I was very caught up with my career, right? I was this new grad physical therapist. I was practicing what I thought was at the top of my license. So I was very unconsciously enamored with myself at that time. I was very caught up in success and how I appeared and how I was the man, right? I was very much enamored with myself. Okay. And how I was perceived by others, and et cetera, et cetera. So I thought that the more that I worked and the more that I immersed myself into my career, my profession, my knowledge base, my skill set, that the better my life would be. Right. And just like with anything, too much of a good thing can be very bad. And I was at that point where I was pushing it and I was pushing it. And so it got to where things that I had previously been able to make time for, I was no longer making time for. I was no longer making time for the relationships in my life. I was no longer making time for my health and my exercise and the way that I honored and nurtured my body to try and keep it healthy and strong and prevent further deterioration and disease down the road by just being more active, eating better, making better decisions. So I was doing all these things, right? Probably not sleeping well. Um, all these things were adding up, and I knew, obviously, as I was gaining weight over time, it's impossible not to when you act in that way and you live in that way. I was ignoring all the warning signs, right? There was friction in personal relationships. There was friction in trying to close the clasps on my jeans and my work pants, trying to button the collar on my shirt, right? There was friction and tension everywhere. I continued to ignore it though, because I thought, this is what I got to do. This is what I got to do. And honestly, it was much more comfortable to focus on growing my image, my success, and my career than it was to face the growing laundry list of problems that I was starting to catch the hints of, right? Like catch the whiff of it, but I wasn't really quite ready to peek in that door to see what was stinking. You know what I mean? So it all kind of crept up to a point where I ended up going to a doctor's appointment, which I never do. So that's how you know something's wrong, is I'm at the doctor. So I go to this doctor's appointment and I'm worried about several things I got going on. Like I'm not feeling good. I'm starting to notice I'm feeling depressed. I'm starting to, just really struggle with, a lot of digestive things. And I just wasn't feeling good. And I was worried about my weight gain. I didn't seem like a lot, but then, you think it's not much until you realize like, oh shit, it's been 20, 25, 30 pounds. And so you're doing all these things, right? And again, I knew what to do. I knew what to do to try and stay healthy. The thing is, I was actively choosing not to, right? Perhaps this has happened to you. You know exactly what you have to do. It's not rocket science, but you're not doing it, right? Because you're choosing something else. Something else is more important to you. That's higher priority. This is one of those situations. And so I was starting to notice sometimes like I'd feel a little lightheaded. I wouldn't feel right. Just my head felt weird. So, getting my blood pressure checked, and we're starting the exam, and I noticed that my blood pressure was, I think it was either in the high 130s or low to mid 140s over the mid 80s or low 90s. I couldn't remember the specifics of it. I've not been able to kind of trap that memory too clearly, but I do remember it being hypertensive, meaning I was approaching category 1 hypertension. So that was something that that scared me, honestly, because I thought at the time, I was 32, maybe 31, 32. I'm too young for this stuff. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'd always been what I consider to be a healthy guy. I was always considered to be pretty fit, pretty active, like knew how to, be athletic, right? I was very athletic. I knew how to handle myself in the weight room. Like, what are you talking about? Like I had just run a 5K like a year or two before that. Like, what's the big deal? What are you talking about? So that's an example for me, right? That was a big wake up call for me that I had to start doing something differently. And the fact that I was getting diagnosed with high blood pressure, right? And she was concerned. She was saying that, well, if this continues to stay in this zone, right, when we come back and we check you again, then we're probably going to need to talk about taking some medication, right? If you're not able to get this under control. And so that for me was a big wake up call. That was me waiting until it was broken to attempt to fix it. Right. And I know as you're listening to this, you're thinking about some scenarios in your life, some situations where you have waited until it's broken to attempt to fix it, right? You're waiting for her to threaten you with a divorce or a breakup before you're willing to put in the work to fix the relationship, right? So we got health, we got relationships. Both of them were notoriously bad for waiting until they're broken to try to fix them. So let's talk about this. Let's talk a little bit about some psychological things behind waiting, right? These concepts like avoidance, procrastination, and how leading, how that leads us to wait until things are broken before we address them. So that kind of recent, or that health scare example that I gave, fits perfectly into this, because there was things that I knew that I needed to do, yet I was continuing to put them off. And I want to maybe kind of dive into my particular suspicion behind that. I was struggling a lot with myself, my identity. I was really lacking, I think, in a lot of healthy self-awareness. So what I was doing is I was trying to be who I thought everyone expected me to be, instead of who I am through the Lord God Almighty. I was trying to be me. And if I don't stop hitting this microphone, I swear, I'm so sorry. I've done this before, I promise. So waiting until things are too late is, that falls in that category of avoidance behavior, procrastination. Why do we procrastinate? Why do we put things off? Why don't we just face them head on? We're ready to face them. I think a lot of that stems from our first, probably surface level reaction, is to say, I didn't feel like it, right? I didn't feel like it. Okay, well, if we leave it there, that's an excuse that you think is valid. But if you dig a little bit deeper into it, we look at it as, well, what is it about tackling that thing that we don't want to do? What are we trying to hide from? What are we wanting to avoid? What sort of uncomfortable feeling are we not wanting to face here? And a lot of it is this. Now, in that specific scenario I gave you about my health, that meant that I was going to be called to be responsible for myself before I was ready, before somebody else had brought it to my attention, right? I was going to have to be responsible for my own actions. And that was something I was not comfortable doing in my personal life. Professionally, sure. Yeah. Like, I want to be the best. I want to be the best. Bring it to my attention. Let me know where I need to grow. But outside the workplace, I'd probably dog cuss you if you try to tell me that I need to work on something. In fact, I probably did. It's hard to do, to face yourself like that. And that can create a lot of unaware anxiety that is stemming or kind of brewing beneath the surface. The anxiety of having to face something that we're not ready to face leads us to continue to put it off, right? What is it at that moment that I felt like I didn't deserve it, right? I didn't think I was a good person, probably subconsciously. And I think if I was honest with myself, I didn't think I was a good person. I thought I knew how to portray a good person, but my thoughts, my actions, I was so selfish, deceitful, right? I was living for me. That was it. I knew how to say the right thing, but my actions behind closed doors and my thoughts when it was only me would not reflect somebody that was a good person. And I knew that having to act in a way that was healthy for me, that wouldn't necessarily benefit me to the outside world, right? Because at that time I was caught up in status and performance. And so I thought that my health, right, that was more of more of a personal thing. Okay, so if my health was being taken care of, that means that I am taking care of myself. And then that means that I must think that I'm worth taking care of. And to be honest with you, I don't think that I was thinking that way. And so that's why I was anxious about doing anything differently than what I was doing. Just immerse myself in work, and that should be good enough. And then I'm slapped in the face with this wake-up call. And I know many of you guys are slapped in the face with that wake-up call when she's packing up her stuff, when she's telling you the relationship's over, when she's done trying to fix it, right? That's the slap in the face, right? Because before then, you were too anxious. If you're being real with yourself, you were too anxious to try to face the uncomfortable truths, the inconvenient truths that existed behind why you weren't stepping up to the plate before then. And that's it, right? So I want to segue that into the story of the prodigal son. right? So it's a lot of us as men, we're notorious. We like the relationship, the health scare. We wait until things are in a really dire situation before we return to where we're supposed to be, doing what we're supposed to do, fixing things that should be fixed along the way. Right. So I want to segue that into a comparison with the story of the prodigal son. Right. And so if you don't have your Bible handy, I'll just go ahead and I'll read it. It's Luke chapter 15. It's verses 11 through 32. I might not read the whole thing, but I want to get the gist of the story so that way you guys can see the comparison. Right. This is not a new tale that we're that we're trying to pull here. All right. This has been going on for centuries. Is that we wait until we're in the most dire situation because we try to be selfish and we try to ignore the warnings and live for ourselves. And then we get to a rock bottom point, and it doesn't have to be that way, guys, but we continue to do it. We wait till we're in a rock bottom situation before we're ready to turn back and do what we need to do to fix it. All right. So in verse 11, Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had, and he set off for a distant country. All right. And as I'm doing this, I'm going to change the, there we go. I prefer the English Standard Version for this. All right. So, and he said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had, and he took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything, right? He was starving. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger, right? So he's mad, he's frustrated, he's angry at his situation. That's his own doing. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants, right? Because he saw that they were living better than he was at this point, and he knew he'd messed up. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion. And he ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Wow. How how much of that can you relate to? Right now, I'm not talking, at least in my scenario, right? I'm not talking about my relationship with my father. I'm talking about my relationship with the Father. Right? I was gone. And he knew I would come back, right? He knew I would come back. This father didn't, but look at the way he greeted him, right? He didn't chew him out. He didn't disown him. He didn't cast him off to say, be gone, I don't know you anymore. You chose to leave, now be gone. He didn't say that. What he did was he celebrated. He celebrated because the son that he thought was lost and dead is found, and he's home where he belongs. And his mistake that he made is forgiven. Wow. All right. So I won't, well, I guess I will. I guess I will. I'll finish this. So moving on into verse 25. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry, right? The brother was angry. He refused to go in, and his father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, look, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, son, you were always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. Right? So that if you look into that story, there's a great deal of maturity. Again, beyond the immaturity that he showed with what he did to squander his riches and ruin his name and wander off and essentially live in poverty, right? There took a great deal of strength to acknowledge the errors of his way and for him to continue to face the music, right? He had delayed it long enough. He knew it was time to face the music, right? Because if he had waited too long to fix the problems in his life, right, to go back home, to own up to his mistakes, to repair the damaged relationships, the lost opportunities, or the deteriorating risk of his health if he continued to starve, that could have been the end of him, right? But instead, he sucked it up. He did what he needed to do to go back and own up to his mistakes. Right. And so, guys, I can't encourage you all enough, as well as myself, right? It's a constant reminder. Face your problems head on. Acknowledging and addressing your shortcomings, your bad habits, your poor patterns, your issues that you've not wanted to face, right? Because they give you anxiety. So you want to immerse yourself in developing status and success, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying that those things are bad, but when they are your God, they are bad. All these things, when you do that, right, you can prevent these issues, right? Instead of waiting too long, waiting too late, we can prevent them. So I hope, right, that you guys have been able to find some sort of relation, right, to these struggles, and understand, guys, like if you're in that situation right now, if you've squandered off your success, your riches, what was given to you because you had selfish ambitions, desires, whatever, don't let it be the end of you by refusing to be man enough to step up and own it. Right? Doing that is doing the right thing. Now, if you're doing it to try and hope for, like, right? So, like, here's the thing. When he went back to his father, was he expecting that? Did he do that? Say, well, he went back just hoping to get a job so he could live like one of the servants. Right? When you guys, right, when we seek to own up to our shortcomings, try to make right what we've wronged, think about this honestly. Are we doing it to try and just get the bare minimum and then be punished? Or are we only coming back to make it right in hopes that we get what we really want? And that's to be treated like a king. Right. So I invite you guys this next week. Check your motivations. Check your motivations. I think it's a really healthy thing to do. And as long as we continue Yeah, I know speaking for myself, as long as I continue to focus on who I am without God compared to who I am with God, and how that drive, that motivation that comes from the tale of two roads right there, the road becomes much less rocky than the one where I'm self-motivating by all my ambitions, desires, etc. And a lot of you guys, you're stumbling across this podcast because you've waited too long, right? And now you're faced with one of those prodigal son moments where you're in despair. It's looking like it's the end of your relationship. You might have a health scare, et cetera, et cetera. And you think that, well, I've got to do something, right? Don't be like me and wait until the doctor's threatening you with serious medication treatment, when there are all things I could have changed way earlier, right? And as a result, right, I'm thankful for that wake up call because I've never been back in that situation. And God willing, I won't ever be. So, guys, I invite you all this week, consider these areas in your life where you're doing the same thing. And if you're up for it, share your experiences, right? So, like, if you're catching on YouTube, share your experiences with this own type of situation in your life. Where have you seen this happen? What did you learn from it? How have you been made better for it? All right, guys, I appreciate your time. And if you're looking for more ways to connect with me or any of the products or services that I help guys with, and primarily fitness based, but do a lot of lifestyle coaching within that, uh, habit creation stuff, check out the links in the description. Check out the links in the show notes. There's different ways to work with me, and look forward to having the chance to try and help work with you guys through whatever struggles you might be having. So, all right, take care.